Can you name any concessions that Vladimir Putin made during this meeting? Have any
I wouldn't name them on your program.
Have any concessions
I wouldn't name
been
them
asked?
on your program. Why would I do that?
Where is the pressure?
Well, of course, because you can't have a peace agreement. No, you can't have a peace agreement unless both sides give and get. You can't have a peace agreement unless both sides make concessions. That's a fact. That's true in virtually any negotiation. If not, it's just called surrender. And neither side is going to surrender. So both sides are going to have to make concessions. So, of course, concessions were asked. But what utility would there be of me going on a program and tell you we wagged our finger at Putin and told him you must do this and you must do that? It's only going to make it harder and less likely that they're going to agree to these things. So these negotiations, as much as everyone would love it to be a live pay-per-view event, these discussions only work best when they are conducted privately in serious negotiations in which people who have to go back and respond to constituencies, because even totalitarian governments have constituencies they have to respond to, people have to go back and defend these agreements that they make. And so, and figure out a way to explain them to people. So we need to create space for concessions to be made. But of course, concessions were asked. Well, first of all, the Russians are already facing very severe consequences. There's not a single sanction that's been lifted. And not one. I mean, they're facing all the same sanctions that have been in place today. All the American support continues for Ukraine. And ultimately, look, if we're not going to be able to reach an agreement here at any point, then there are going to be consequences. Not only the consequences of the war continuing, but the consequences of all those sanctions continuing and potentially new sanctions on top of it as well. But what we're trying to do right now is end the war. And in order to end the war, you've got to give every opportunity that exists. You have to be open to any opportunity that exists to bring it about. And here's the thing to remind everybody, and when the president says this is not our war, but let's be frank, this is not our war. The United States is not in a war. Ukraine is in a war, and we've been supporting Ukraine. We happen to be in the role of the only country in the world, with the only leader in the world, that can actually bring Putin to a table to even discuss these things. Now, the president has traveled, all the way to Alaska, all the way back, has dedicated months and months of work, him, our entire team on this matter, because we want to see an end to the war. But if tomorrow the war continues, life in America will not be fundamentally altered. So I think that what we have to understand is that this has been a priority for this president because he wants to promote peace. He wants to promote the end of a war. And I think we should be happy that we have a president that's trying to promote peace and bring a war to an end.
Boy. So we got to talk about Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who used to be called Lil Marco, but now he Big Marco, okay? And Big Marco came out in this interview with Margaret Brennan, the anchor for Face the Nation, okay, who's probably one of the nastiest liberal media anchors on television outside of Abby Phillip. I think it's really hard to beat the nastiness of Abby Phillip, but I think both of these women are insufferable, okay? So in this interview, which is just one of a number of interviews that Marco Rubio did with the mainstream liberal media on this topic, the mainstream liberal media got their talking points and they decided to attack Marco Rubio for the optics of the President Trump meeting with Vladimir Putin, okay? We're in a position where we're trying to make Vladimir Putin stop killing people in Ukraine. And for whatever reason, the mainstream liberal media thinks that you're supposed to treat that person with no respect, right? Or to disrespect them, or to call them mean names and say bad things about them in order to get them to capitulate to what we want them to do, which is to stop killing people, okay? Marco Rubio, who was a part of these negotiations, is going to set the liberal media straight on how these negotiations actually went. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this.
But ultimately, if Vladimir Putin is going to be offered land that he has not seized yet, but negotiates his way into, doesn't this set a dangerous precedent that the United States now accepts this concept that it is okay to seize land by force?
Well, Putin's already seized land by force, and that in and of itself is not a positive precedent. This whole war
is a negative
demanding a withdrawal
precedent.
Well, again, in order to have a deal here to reach the end of this conflict, both sides are going to have to make concessions. That's just a fact.
Does that mean
in any negotiation,
where Russian forces are now?
But this is not about acceptance. This is about what Ukraine can accept and what Russia can accept. They both have to accept it. Otherwise, there won't be a peace deal. Okay? If there aren't concessions, if one side gets everything they want, that's called surrender. That's called the end of the war through surrender. And that's not what we're close to doing, because neither side here is on the verge of surrender or anything close to it. So in order for there to be a peace deal, this is just a fact. We may not like it. It may not be pleasant. It may be distasteful. But in order for there to be an end of the war, there are things Russia wants that it cannot get, and there are things Ukraine wants that it's not going to get. Both sides are going to have to give up something in order to get to the table, in order to make this happen. That's just the way it is. And I mean, the sooner we accept that, that's the reality. Now, what those things are is going to be up to both sides. There's no conditions that can be imposed on Ukraine. They're going to have to accept things, but they're going to have to get things too. And so, for example, Ukraine is a sovereign country. They have a right, like every sovereign country does in the world, to enter into security alliances with other countries to prevent an invasion in the future, to prevent threats to their national security. That's not an unreasonable request. That's something that needs to be worked on. Territories will have to be discussed. It's just a fact. And there are things that maybe Russia's holding now that they're going to have to give up. Who knows? The point is, we need to create a scenario where that becomes possible. And that's why this has been so hard, because neither side up to now has been, willing to give on some of these things. But we'll see if that's possible. It may not be, but we're going to try, and we're going to do everything we can to try to achieve a peace.
Yeah, and I think they deserve credit for that. Right? I think they deserve credit for trying, because Biden was not trying. Kamala was not trying. Okay? They were not trying at all. They don't care how long the war continues, as long as Ukrainians are being sacrificed in order to take out Russians, right? That's all they care about. That's all they care about, okay? They don't care about the reality that in the long term, Ukraine can't really win this. Now, the problem that we have here, okay, is that I don't think that Ukraine really has much leverage over Russia, in the sense that Russia knows that at this point, this is a war of attrition, and they're probably going to come out on top in the long run if it continues, okay? And because of that, again, they have the ultimate leverage of just being able to wait it out, okay? And that is why at this point it is going to be up to Ukraine to determine whether or not they are going to give up their territory and try to have peace now and hope and pray that Russia doesn't try to invade again, or are they going to continue to fight for territory that they feel belongs to them. And hey, if they want to do that, fine. But at some point, the United States of America, we have to make a decision about whether or not we want to continue to participate in that, okay? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it is a drain on our resources, okay? And as Marco Rubio has pointed out in these interviews, I mean, what happens in Ukraine and Russia materially doesn't really have an effect on the lives of the American people, okay? But the Europeans, on the other hand, yes, I understand why it matters to the Europeans, but again, to the Americans, to us, on the other side of the world, hey, it don't really affect us like that. We have other things that we'd rather be focused on, like China, right? That's what we'd rather be focused on. So I personally think it's going to come down to whether or not Ukraine is going to be willing to give up territory. And if so, then it's going to come down to whether or not Russia will accept Ukraine having security guarantees. Now, what does security guarantees look like? Who knows, right? We already know that Putin does not want Ukraine to have membership in NATO. So maybe that is a non-starter for the Russians. I don't know. But I think that's basically where we're at this point. Is Ukraine willing to give up territory, and is Russia willing to allow Ukraine to have quote-unquote security guarantees? I think those are the biggest roadblocks right now.
I understand you can't get into specifics in a public conversation, but we're looking at Russian troops and strikes intensifying. Did you hear anything from Vladimir Putin that indicated he is willing to make a single concession?
Well, I think there are a couple. There were not enough for Ukraine. If not, we would be announcing a peace deal this morning, right? But certainly there are some things we noticed changes. There are some changes that I think are possible. I think there's some concepts that were discussed that could potentially lead to something. But again, all these things have to be verifiable. It isn't real until it's real. One thing is what you say you might be willing to consider. Another thing is your willingness to do it. And it always becomes a trade-off in all of this. But you talk about the intensifying strikes on the Russian side. Yeah, they're full-time war machine. That's what's happening. The Russian economy's basically been turned into a full-time wartime economy. They have a lot of people. It's a big country. It's not just large geographically. It has huge populations. It continues to churn through people. They lost 20,000 Russian soldiers were killed last month in July in this war. That just tells you the price they're willing to pay. I'm not saying any of this is admirable. I'm saying that this is the reality of the war that we're facing. It's become attrition in some ways. It's a meat grinder, and they just have more meat to grind.
Well, let me ask you about the security that you just mentioned there, because Italy's prime minister says that President Trump revived the idea of security guarantees inspired by NATO's Article 5 and a collective security clause that would involve the United States. How does that work?
Yeah,
are these U.S. troops? Are these U.S. monitors?
Well, that's what we're going to be working on. That's one of the reasons why, I talked yesterday to all the national security advisors, a bunch of them from the different European countries. There are European leaders coming here tomorrow, heads of state coming tomorrow, along with President Zelensky, to discuss this in more detail. I mean, the constructs of something like this needs to be built out. It's a concept is one thing, the reality, how it's built and how it would work is another. But those are the kinds of talks that we're going to be having with them, along with some of the other issues that are at play. But that is one of the, if you were to break this thing down, I mean, there needs to be an agreement on territories and where the lines are going to be drawn. That's not going to be very easy. That's going to be tough. I think there has to be some discussion about security guarantees for Ukraine, because they don't want this war to, none of us want to see this war in the future. They're a sovereign country. They have a right to have security agreements with other countries and security alliances with other countries. And then there's the whole issue of reconstruction. How do you rebuild the country? Well, potentially, like I said, that's what we're going to be having a conversation about, and that's what we're going to be meeting. That's why they're all coming here tomorrow, and that's why we've been talking on the phone for the last 48 hours with them, and even leading up to it throughout the week, there were various meetings just to sort of build out some of these ideas. So all of these right now are ideas, they're concepts that require some more specificity. We'll need to work with our partners to see what that looks like. And I think that's an area where potential progress is real, but that alone won't be enough. There's a bunch of other things that have to be worked through here.
Yes.
This is a war. It's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. And that's why the president is investing so much time in bringing this to an end. And by the way, everyone is begging us to be involved in this. The Europeans want us involved. The Ukrainians want us involved. Obviously, the Russians want us involved, because the president is the only leader in the world. If this is possible, he's the only one that can help make it happen.
Well, he's got the leverage over Vladimir Putin if he wanted to crush his economy or at least do more damage to it. But you have held off on those secondary sanctions. President Trump told Fox News his advice to President Zelensky is make a deal. Russia's a very big power, and they're not. There is concern from the Europeans that President Zelensky is going to be bullied into signing something away. That's why you have these European leaders coming as backup tomorrow. Can you
No, it isn't. That's not why they're coming
them?
as back. That's not true. No, but that's not that's not true. They're not coming here tomorrow to keep Zelensky from being bullied. They're not coming.
February
in fact,
Oval Office
they're coming here
meeting
tomorrow
in front of television cameras where President Zelensky.
Do you know how many meetings we've had since then?
Oh no, I know, and I was just up in Alaska watching the one with Vladimir Putin where a red carpet rolled out.
No, but with Zelensky, we've had more meetings. We've had one meeting with Putin and like a dozen meetings with Zelensky. So, but that's not true. They're not coming here tomorrow to keep Zelensky from being bullied. They're coming here tomorrow because we've been working with the Europeans. We talked to them last week. There were meetings in the UK over the previous weekend.
And they said President Trump was going to demand a ceasefire
as early as Thursday. No. But you said that they're coming here tomorrow to keep Zelensky from being bullied. They're not coming here tomorrow. Oh, this is such a stupid media narrative that they're coming here tomorrow because Trump is going to bully Zelensky into a bad deal. We've been working with these people for weeks on this stuff. They're coming here tomorrow because they chose to come here tomorrow. We invited them to come. We invited them to come. The president invited them to come.
But the president...
Wow. Again, shout out to Big Rubio. Big Marco, right? Big Marco! Who, at this point, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I think he's making a strong case for 2028, to be honest with you. A strong case, okay? I could see a JD Rubio ticket, Rubio JD, right? I'm not sure if JD could be vice president again. Actually, I believe he can be, right? He should better be vice president again. Or, we have DeSantis and a Rubio ticket or Rubio DeSantis. I'm just saying, Rubio is a guy that is really proven himself to be extremely effective at what he does, right? He is a professional. He's a politician, but, I mean, the guy is good, right? He's really good at what he does, and he has certainly outperformed as Secretary of State, okay? So, yeah, I mean, he's clearly calling out the narrative here from the media, because that's what it's all about, narrative. Well, the European leaders are coming so that Zelensky doesn't get bullied. And it's like, no. That's not what's happening. We invited them. We want all of the people who have a stake in this conflict in the same room, okay, so that we can all come to the same page, right, in regards to how to deal with Putin and Russia, right? We heard the Russian side of it. We want to hear the European side of it. And then we want to figure out how we can mediate and to make this peace happen. That's clearly what's going on here, right? Because if you talk to Zelensky alone without the rest of the Europeans, then they're going to get mad, right? They're going to get mad if Zelensky agrees to something that they don't like, right? So again, it's not really about Zelensky being bullied. It's just about getting everybody who has a stake in the conflict in the same room and everybody getting on the same page. I think that's what's happening here more so than anything. It's just getting everybody on the same page about where we're trying to go. And like I told you guys before, the media is going to spin whatever narrative they want, but you're not going to know the success of this meeting, okay, until you see what happens in subsequent meetings, right? If you start seeing more and more meetings, more progress, then you'll know that, okay, that meeting was successful, okay? If there is no progress, right, then you know it wasn't successful. And it's okay if it wasn't successful. Ultimately, I personally believe that, you know, the United States, we only have so much leverage that we can exercise over Russia, right? The strategy of doing the secondary sanctions is not really working out as well as we would like it to work out because, one, India is not trying to play ball, right? They're not trying to stop buying Russian oil. And you have China. We can't really do much to them because they have the minerals, right? So, again, we're not in a position that we can really hurt Russia any more than we've already hurt them. And at some point we have to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, they have the leverage. And because they have the leverage, the Europeans, including Ukraine, they may have to give up more than they want to give up in order to get peace, right? Otherwise, the Ukrainians are going to have to fight it out. They're going to have to fight to the end, which is not something I want to see. But if that's how they want to go about it, then, you know, that's on them. That's a decision for them to make.
The president told those European leaders last week that he wanted a ceasefire. The president went on television, said he would walk out of the meeting if Vladimir Putin didn't agree with one. He said there would be severe consequences if he didn't agree to one. He said he'd walk out in 2 minutes. He spent 3 hours talking to Vladimir Putin, and he did not get one. So there's
because
some mixed
obviously things happened during that meeting. Well, because obviously look, our goal here is not to stage some production for the world to say, oh, how dramatic, he walked out. Our goal here is to have a peace agreement, to end this war, okay? And obviously we felt, and I agreed, that there was enough progress, not a lot of progress, but enough progress made in those talks to allow us to move to the next phase. If not, we wouldn't be having Zelensky flying all the way over here. We wouldn't be having all the Europeans coming all the way over here. Now understand and take with a grain of salt, I'm not saying we're on the verge of a peace deal, but I am saying that we saw movement, enough movement to justify a follow-up meeting with Zelensky and the Europeans, enough movement for us to dedicate even more time to this. You talk about the sanctions. Look, at the end of the day, if peace is not going to be possible here, and this is just going to continue on as a war, people will continue to die by the thousands. The president has that option to then come in and impose new sanctions. But if he did this now, the moment the president puts those additional sanctions, that's the end of the talks. You've basically locked in at least another year to year and a half of war and death and destruction. We may unfortunately wind up there, but we don't want to wind up there. We want to wind up with a peace deal that ends this war so Ukraine can go on with the rest of their lives and rebuild their country and be assured that this is never going to happen again. That's the goal here. We're going to do everything possible to make that happen if it's doable. It will require both sides to make concessions. It will require both sides to get things they're asking for. That's how these deals are made, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what it comes down to, right? That's what it comes down to. Both sides are going to have to make concessions. The question is, which side is going to have to give up more? Probably the Ukrainians or the Europeans, right? It might be, I think they're probably going to have to give up more because they're in a weaker position. But, you know, hey, it is what it is. I think that's better than the alternative. What is the alternative, right? The alternative is for the Ukrainians to keep fighting, right, with U.S. weapons, okay? Or maybe not, right? Maybe not. But the alternative for them to keep fighting and, you know, slowly but surely lose the rest of their country in a war of attrition to Russia, which ultimately, if things ever go bad for Russia, right, if things actually go bad for it indicates that Ukraine actually turns things around, okay, and they start taking back territory, okay, let's just say they start winning, like outright winning the war. Russia has nukes. They have nukes. So, again, it's just one of those things where, you know, people are criticizing the president for his very simple summary of what's happening here, right, and what's at stake, and the position that Zelensky needs to understand, which is that, yeah, Russia's just more powerful than you, right? That's it. Like, they have a stronger country and you don't. Sometimes it's really that simple, right? And that is what people have to accept, right? That is the reality that people have to accept. But our establishment doesn't want to accept that reality because they see that as, well, we're losing to Russia, right? Ukraine losing to Russia is like the United States losing to Russia. It's like, no, we're not losing to Russia. The Ukrainians, that's their country. They're fighting for their country. The proxy war may have failed, but again, that's different than us actually losing a war to Russia. And I think that's the way that a lot of these people see it. And that's why they don't want to accept the reality, which is that, hey, there's no real good outcome for the Ukrainians if they continue to fight at this rate, because again, Russia has nukes, right? So it's like, again, ultimately at the end of the day, like, there is no good scenario for the Ukrainians. It's just about, do you want to accept the least bad, right, scenario and just be happy with that, right? I mean, that's essentially what it comes down to. So again, we're gonna see, right? But the media's framing on this upcoming meeting between President Trump and the Europeans, clearly you can see that they're engaged in treason again, already trying to undermine the president before the meeting, okay, while at the same time claiming that they want peace, except it seems to me they really don't want any peace at all, okay? They rather watch Ukraine get destroyed than for President Trump to get a win. That is the current state of our media. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.